We're having a conversation at WRTI today for the late set with saxophonist, composer, educator, and all-around great person and Philadelphian, Jaleel Shaw. He's got a new recording called Painter of the Invisible coming out July 11th. Jaleel, welcome to the late set.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
I was just thinking, it's been a minute, almost 20 years now since your debut, and you and I were having some conversations.
I actually have that recording on my computer, and I just listened to it a little while ago.
Did you hear a tremendous amount of growth as a musician? You listen to things with a different set of ears many years later.
You know what? The interesting thing that as I get older, I think about growth, but I also think about like evolution more as an artist. So sometimes I go back and I hear myself from like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and there's some great things I hear myself doing that I'm not doing now, and there is growth. There's also growth, because there's definitely times I hear myself playing, 10 years ago, and I'm thinking, why was I, why was I doing that? Or, I'm glad I'm not there anymore, But it's more, I honestly, I feel as though it's more evolution. It's more, I'm thinking more about, the journey, lately, where I am and why I'm here.
I was talking to our producer, Alex Ariff, earlier, and I was recommending a record to him, and it's Sonny Clark, Cool Struttin', Deep Night.
Clark, yes.
And Deep Night, because I was listening to Jackie McLean's solo on it, which I think is just one of the greatest alto saxophone solos. You can even hear him grunting at one point.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really going in.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, after 2 decades, of being a professional musician and releasing material, at the end of the day, it's just a tool, the saxophone. It's a tool that you have to, as an artist, animate in some way and essentially fuse yourself into it to have some personal identity, one that does change over the course of time. How would you describe what that identity, what does Jaleel Shaw sound like now?
That's a heavy question. I feel like I want to sound warm. I want to sound welcoming. I want to sound loving, committed, and like passionate. The music that I play and music that I write, I always wanted to reflect the times, and I always want to. Wow, this is a heavy question for me.
They're not going to get any easier.
Oh, really?
I know.
I think I just ultimately just really want to be as expressive as I can be. Whatever the moment is, I want to be sincere. I want to be honest and not hold back. And that's something, like, as an educator, I've been really focusing on with my students is, being honest about, who you are and, what your message is in the music. So I think honesty would be number one.
As we're looking back 20 years and talking about, old meetings and former conversations, it inevitably leads me to thinking about where we are in the society of jazz, or in the continuum of jazz. And for a good long while, I think people thought of you as like a young blood, even past the point where that term really would have applied. And some of this is because you were playing with people like Roy Haynes in the Fountain of Youth Band.
Right.
And that continues to be true. I mean, I saw an incredible concert that you did with Dave Holland at the Big Ears Festival last year. And you've been touring a lot with that quartet.
Yeah.
But, here we are, like, you are not an upstart.
Yeah.
You've been around the block.
Yep. I've been
and so, and as you said, like, you're teaching and you're mentoring.
Yeah.
Josh and I talk about this a lot. Like, this is kind of where we are coming to terms now with this too, sort of like where you are in the pecking order or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So have you thought about this? Like, have you been thinking about like what it means to come out of the, apprenticeship and journeyman phase and really kind of own where you are now and the lessons that you have to impart?
That's a deep thing because I honestly still very much feel like a student, and I still feel like an apprentice. I'm very thankful, to be playing with Dave now. I feel like I always, and I know I'm getting older, but I always want to play when I have the opportunities to play with a master like that. Because, going from playing with Roy, and even spending time with a great musician like Nate Smith, and going to playing with Dave Holland, for me, that's the most enriching experience for me on the bandstand, playing with someone like that. I feel like the whole time while I was playing with Roy and while I was playing with Dave Holland, I did have a sense of being a leader and trying to take that position too. It's not that easy. I can tell you, and one thing I was just thinking about with this, and I've been talking to people about, like, I look at this album about to come out and I'm like, wow, because it's the fourth album I put out on my own. One of them was a solo album that I didn't even print CDs for, but it's extremely, extremely, extremely hard to put something out on your own, and the amount of time and energy and money can be wearing. I guess what I'm saying is I've always had the mindset of like being out there as like, even when I was in my, when I joined Roy, I was like 25, and I was already like, I already had the mindset, okay, how am I going to get this going? It's definitely a challenge. And I think for me on the educator side, I just feel like that's where it's just very, very, very important. It's meant so much to me to be teaching, to be like, I'm at Manhattan School of Music, and I try to make sure, like I said earlier, I try to make sure the students are honest and they understand why they're doing it. Most importantly for me, I have to remind myself. I shouldn't say I have to. I'm thankful to be playing all the time, but I do remind myself why I'm doing this. To have the ability to express yourself in a way that most people can't, and make a living doing it, is beautiful. To be able to connect to people in a way that I can, and that energy, that spirit, that that's produced through music, through sound, it's just an incredible feeling. So for me, that's been my goal, is just to be able to keep putting myself in situations. When I book a gig now, it's not really so much it is to make money, because I have bills and I have to pay my rent, and but it's also this urge to connect, to share that energy and connect with people. I feel as though music is, the older I get, I just feel like music is so important. It's, as a musician, when I'm playing to an audience, I'm healing in a lot of ways. It's almost like praying in a way, so that for me has been paramount. That's the most important thing now at this point in my life, is just to be playing as much as possible, regardless of the situation.
That focus on the practice over the product. But as I hear you talking about the various like hassles and logistical hurdles to putting out an album and that sort of thing, it also raises a question for me, and I hope you don't mind me asking this, but I wonder whether there's a part of you that is happier when you're not leading or headlining, when you're part of something else. And the comparison that comes to mind for me is Mark Turner, who, as we know, like is always at 100% in any circumstance and has the musical spirit of a leader, but doesn't really have the temperament of one, and kind of doesn't enjoy
Oh, really?
having his name on the, on the
Wow.
bill, or,
I didn't know that.
like he's a little bit reluctant.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I wonder if there's any part of you that
Hmm.
that shares that sensibility in some way.
I love playing as a leader. I love playing my music, and I do feel as though it is the closest thing to me being sincere and honest
Mhm.
is playing my own music, with band members that I choose, so now again, it's different. It is also another experience to play with other bands. And one thing that I thought about with Dave, one thing I've been thinking about overall, and as you get older, when people call you to do gigs, you are thinking about how much it reflects who you are as an artist. So with Dave, immediately when I joined that band, I was like, because it's funny because I talked to Kenny Garrett. We were talking maybe about a month after I started playing with Dave, and he said, "Yeah, I saw you playing with Dave," and he said, "It must be great." And I said, "Yeah, man, it's incredible." And he said, "Yeah, man, playing with the masters, playing with someone like him, they really bring you closer to who you are and what you want to be, and they open your eyes up to the possibilities." He said, "That's what it was like playing with Miles for me. He really opened my eyes up to things that I could do and wanted to do." And that's how I felt when I joined Dave's band. It was like, there's so much freedom. As you could see, there was so much freedom in that band. And it's something that I kind of wanted to get closer to. Because at the time, I had been listening to a lot of Anthony Braxton and Sam Rivers, and Dave was on those records. But, just to be in that band playing that, just to get that opportunity when you're already in that headspace and you're thinking, how can I get to this? And then Dave called you and said you want to play in the band, and you get to it. So there's that, playing as a sideman and playing as a leader. I love playing as a leader. I love getting together with musicians and figuring out my music and developing my music. But just like putting out your own record can be challenging. Doing things independently, booking is a challenge too. So that's something that I feel like I'm still growing into, and I'm still, learning how to navigate.
Earlier this year, you played at Solar Myth here in Philadelphia. It was the first time you had led a set of music in Philadelphia for many years.
Yeah.
You talk about the connection with the audience, and I want to talk about Tamir. One of the things that on the record, it's a 10, 11-minute song. You played a nearly 26-minute performance of it at Solar Myth, and it was epic, if I may use a jazz bro term. It really was, and I thought to myself, it certainly hits different when it's live. How do you sort of reconcile, it's still you on the records, but the live performance and the people in the room, I feel like sometimes maybe we get a heightened aspect of Jaleel. It feels more powerful sometimes. I mean, how do you sort of reconcile that live delivery and then making a really wonderful record with the same material that will hit in a different way?
Yeah. Well, I am still growing a lot when it comes to recording. And you're more conscious of time when you're in the studio. Now that's an 11-minute song, and I was still being conscious of time with that. And we went in there. We went in the studio, getting ready to record Tamir, and I said, let's not worry too much about time with this one. Although a lot of the tunes on this album are pretty lengthy. Um, I felt like, especially with this album, it's been a long time since I put out a studio recording. It's been, you know, over 12 years. So I, I wasn't that worried about time. But at the same time, I wasn't going to do a 17, 20-minute version of Tamir. When I'm on a stage, I sometimes go to another place. And the most important thing is the moment and making sure that I'm being honest. I'm telling you how I feel.
Is it a place where you see yourself more clearly, or you don't see yourself at all anymore? Do you become invisible in some way?
Do I become invisible? I actually think things do become are very clear, and that's something I think over time. And one thing, honestly, with Roy Haynes, I learned this with Roy. It was one of the first gigs I did with Roy. And it was funny because he was upset. We're playing at the Iridium. I'll never forget this. And we get off the stage and, we finish the last song and Roy's visibly upset. And we go backstage. He said, what's wrong with you, man? What's wrong? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, don't you want to play? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, why are you taking these short solos? Why do you keep taking, why are your solos so short? And I said, well, I'm conscious of time. And he was like, well, you got to be conscious of the moment. You got to be in the moment. He said, don't ever, compromise anything for the moment. And that was the first time I've had, I'm coming from playing with the Mingus Big Band where, don't take a long solo. Don't take more than a couple choruses or you're going to hear it. So with Roy, from that moment on, that's what it was. When we got on the bandstand, Roy didn't complain about us playing long. And, when I went back and I listened to the recordings I have, the live recordings I have that he's on, especially him with Train, they're going for it, And
that Newport set is exceptional.
Newport is amazing. And so for me, being able to do that, and to do that with Roy for 15 years, you stay in that mindset of the moment. This is, you as every day we don't know if this is our last day. When I pick up my instrument to play, I don't know if it's the last time I'm going to get to play. I'm thankful for every moment that I get to, I feel blessed to be able to play music and express myself like that and just, give thanks through my horn. So once I'm there, I'm there,
That awareness of preciousness, I have to imagine it's heightened when you are approaching a piece of music that bears a dedication like Tamir.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's your in the momentness and the communication with the audience, but there's also your connection to the material and its inspiration.
Yeah. Tamir, there was a lot going on, around the time Tamir had his life taken from him. But I don't think anything, by the time what happened with Tamir happened, I was kind of getting numb, to the stories of, Black men. And I was enraged, Trayvon Martin, I was upset. It hurt me. But gradually, it was just something that was just happening. And you become numb to it. And you get used to it, Tamir was really heavy for me. Like it was, I don't have any siblings. That's not true. I have a half sister. We didn't grow up together, but I didn't have a little brother, and I wouldn't. I would think that I wouldn't be able to relate to that, like someone that has a little brother or a kid that close. But it felt like I had lost my little brother, And it really, really hurt because, and even now when I think about it, and I think about, at 13, I was just starting to play the saxophone, you know. I was probably just joining Mr. Hines' Lovey Hines' ensemble. And I thought about everything that I was able to do up until the time, that I learned that he passed. And that's what led me to write that. And I still think about that today when I play the song, because I think, who knows what Tamir would have ended up being. And just for playing with a toy gun in a park, he lost his life.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you have a song on this record, Invisible Man, and it's a significant book by Ralph Ellison.
Yeah.
It's a book that I'm fortunate enough to have read when I was in high school. I want to thank my teacher, Miss Hood, for that. And we read Richard Wright as well, for a very different sort of aspect, more of a protest aspect than Ellison was, I feel. But this idea where the narrator, feels like an invisible person and in fact is in a coal mine with a bunch of lights on, and then you learn the narrator's story, and effectively he's escaped a lynch. They're trying to lynch him, and so he's in a coal mine. But then after a while he decides that he wants to sort of reintegrate and go back into society, and that to me was a significant development in that character.
Yeah.
The idea to re-enter society.
Right. Well, for me, the Invisible Man was kind of referencing Ralph Ellison, but it was just really about how I do feel sometimes in society as a whole, going into a store and no one helping you because they don't think you're going to buy anything, or walking down the street and someone not seeing you as equal to them, or being afraid of you. And that happened to me a month about, me and my wife, we've just moved and walking down the street, and a lady saw me cross the street, or I've gone places, people still clutching their purses, and it's still like, wow. And the other thing is, for me, I think about, just thinking about this music and to think about the great artists that didn't get their due. I think about that a lot. I think about the great musicians. We just lost Joe Ford, and Joe Ford has been a hero of mine for a long time. I just talked to him like a month or two ago, and when I heard that he passed, the first thing I thought was like, man, Joe didn't get his due. Joe didn't get his due. And I went to his funeral. I was crushed. I went to the funeral, and I just sat there thinking like, man, it's, they were playing his music, and I just feel as there's so many, there's so many artists overall, but there are a lot of Black musicians that didn't go recognized. They didn't get the record deal, and they weren't able to put out their own music, and they didn't get that recognition. And it kind of baffles me. I think about Casey Benjamin a lot. He was gone, and that's the first thing I thought about when Casey left. And the deep thing about Casey is like, Casey is a contemporary. He's, we were the same age, and as much as I had heard him play, I realized I didn't really do that deep dive and check Casey out. And that's what I ended up doing, a deep dive. When he passed, I had, Stefan had given me these records that weren't even out yet. And I went back and I listened to him again, the stuff that he was doing, and I use pedals too. And I was using, I used different pedals, but the stuff that he was doing with pedals, his effects, So, but just going back to, not that Casey was invisible, but in ways, man, the world should have known who Casey Benjamin was.
I thought that was a beautiful way to end the record. Until we meet again.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Short, simple,
Yeah.
elegant.
Yeah. And that
Love
was for
it.
him, and that was for Dave too. Dave Sanborn. And also, I don't know if you guys knew Rayburn Wright. He was he's like one of the main saxophone teachers here. Everyone came through Rayburn Wright, and he passed away a couple years ago. But yeah, that was for them. Dave Sanborn and I were we had our saxophone talks, and we talked for a very long time. He called me and I didn't know. I knew he was sick. I didn't understand how sick he was. He called me right before he passed. We talked for like almost, I feel like 2 hours. And it got to the point where it was like, man, Dave was like telling me it's like he was telling me everything that he wanted to tell me in those 2 hours. And it was deep, and then next thing I knew, he was gone. So until we meet again was for them.
I love Baldwin's Blues.
Oh, thank you.
I have to
Yeah.
just say it.
Yeah.
There's a moment in your solo right around the 3-minute mark where you are sort of channeling Donna Lee, some other Charlie Parker riff, and all of me in the span of like 10 seconds.
Oh,
you
thank
know, and when that happens, it's just pure inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then a really wonderful solo also by Lawrence Fields on the piano for that.
Yes, Lawrence sounds amazing on that.
I'm curious, do you have like a favorite James Baldwin quote? I mean, he is certainly quotable.
There's an interview with James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni where he's talking about the experience of racism and how it affects you and how you start to believe the things that are being said and done to you, to the point where what he said, you're the accomplice to your own murder.
Wow.
Deep. And he says how you just start to doubt yourself. That one hit me hard. It's like, wow. And these are things that sometimes we do self-consciously. I really love and admire James Baldwin. My mom is like, if you were to come to our house, you see books everywhere. And James Baldwin is she has a lot of James Baldwin books, a lot of Langston Hughes. But for me, James Baldwin, lately, that song came more from me watching the video clips of his interviews and his debates than the books. I read his books a long time ago, and I just love how he fought. I love how he fought for our people, by all means.
Especially in those television appearances, there's such a balance of ferocity and elegance,
Yes,
right? Like
yes.
he is composed at all times, and he is
Yes.
so eloquent.
Yes.
But he is on fire at the
Yes.
same
Yes.
time,
Yes.
right?
He is on fire. He is on fire. And I've always admired that about him. And I think the other thing is like, I feel as though now we need more James Baldwins. I think they exist, but they're not given the attention like James Baldwin was, then. We don't see them on TV, so I find myself going back to those interviews, for inspiration.
I'll give you one. Since you brought up your mother, James Baldwin said, "Love doesn't begin and end the way we think it does." He said, "Love is a battle. Love is a war." And then he says, "Love is growing up." Now, your mother is the one who has seen you grow up the most.
Yes.
But just that idea about growing up, and this constant evolution and this constant, change in perspective and all of these things, like that's what love is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of us need to grow up in this country, I feel.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's another thing, the title of my album has a few different meanings. The first one was, I call it Painter of the Invisible, because I felt like as a musician, I do feel like I mean, I am an artist, but I feel like I'm a painter of sound, which is invisible, you know. But it, for the listener, it it allows the listener to use his or her imagination in ways that other art does not, you know.
Like the radio.
Like right, you know. But you know, you see a painting. Sometimes a painting can suggest something.
Yeah.
With music and even with titles, you know, sometimes I think about titles and I think, what would and I've thought about doing this with an album, like just leaving the space blank. You put the title of this song. What does this song mean to you? You know, because without knowing what the title of song is, your imagination goes even deeper. The second part is about society. And it is about, you know, the growth, especially of like where we are now, like the need to grow. And I do feel as though this moment that we're in, you know, books are being banned. The history, they're trying to wipe out, you know, or keep people from knowing the history, you know, of in particular, and indigenous people of this country, of this nation, of this country, the people that helped build this country. And I've always thought about the fact that, you know, like we talk about growth and development. When it comes to that, I never really felt like it was like I was learning that in school anyway, you know? So when I started seeing these books get banned, you know, I mean, as horrible as I think it is, and it is horrible, I realized that everything that I learned about my culture, I learned at home. You know, I didn't learn about Miles Davis and Duke Ellington and Charlie Parker, you know, when I was in school, you know.
So you're talking about invisibility effectively by erasure in some sense.
Yeah, in some sense.
You know,
erasure or obscurity.
Obscurity.
Or like something that has cloaked it.
Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of been, you know, as I was growing up, you know, like when I look back at when I was growing up, when I was in high school and elementary school, you know, even talking about James Baldwin, I didn't have to read James Baldwin when I was in school. My mom had those books. I wasn't learning about Miles Davis or Charlie Parker. I learned about Miles Davis and Charlie Parker because my mom had those records, and I was going to, you know, going to spend time with Mr. Haynes every weekend and learning from Rayburn Wright. You know, that's where I learned about. And, you know, when I really think about it, that's where I was learning my history, you know? So I feel like the issue that we have here is deep rooted, you know, it's been here. They're banning books now, but, you know, the history has been, and I'm not going to say it's been banned, but it's been cloaked for a long time. And I think that like when we talk about racism, if the history of the people that helped build this nation or the people that were here originally is cloaked, a lot of the people that really need to learn it, you know, are the people that are not African American more than the people that are African American need to learn it. And I think that's the root of for me, that's the root of racism. It's just like not understanding the people that you hate.
It makes the invisible, in this sense, painter of the invisible, a noun. It makes it a people.
Yes.
And you can be painting the story.
Yes.
So that there's continually a canvas, and in some way that erasure or that cloaking doesn't happen.
Right. Well, I feel as though in a way, like when I think about that history, I feel like a grill, like, and that's, you know, going back to teaching, you know, and I realize this now, you know, and this is me getting older, But some of the students that I teach, they don't know about the people that I checked out, you know. And going back to Joe Ford. You checked out Joe Ford? You checked out Oliver Lake? You know these guys?
Arthur Blythe.
Arthur Blythe, you know, Bobby Watson, you know, and that gap just over time. And I got it too. When I was young. I hadn't checked out. I didn't know who Anthony Braxton was for the longest time. I didn't know who Arthur Blythe was. I had people that had to hit me to those. Now my mom had a whole bunch of records, which kind of helped me when I was a kid because she had them before I even started playing. So once I started playing, I was going through these records like, oh, who's Ornette Coleman? And I would put the Ornette Coleman record on. And I was like, okay, like, it was a little over my head, but I knew that name immediately when I started playing. But over time, some of the history does kind of get lost, and sometimes it's not it being cloaked, it's just exposure. Some of the students are just not exposed to it. I know I wasn't exposed to a lot of great music that I'm still learning about. So I feel as though that's another meaning, behind Painter of the Invisible, just bringing things to light that I think people need to be aware of.
When you talk about awareness, and we've talked a bit about audience, I'd like to ask about your perception of this thing that's happened, very recently. Is Robert Glasper on your first album?
Yeah, my first two records,
so you and Robert go way back, like, to his first arrival in New York, and so you guys have had this trajectory together, and we've seen him build this thing, back to Casey Benjamin, right? Like the Black Radio now has effectively like a huge lifestyle festival out in Napa.
Right. Yeah, I just saw that.
So multiple Grammys, like, tens of thousands of albums sold, and like a real awakened sort of cultural pride around this music.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made a difference, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It's brought people in who weren't in, and listening. And so as someone who has come up, side by side with Rob and played with him, but also sort of stood outside of that circle of that thing. Like, what are your thoughts about how transformative it's been over the last 20 years?
When I first met Robert, I was actually checking out. I was like a Dilla addict. Everything was Dilla.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to Dilla like crazy. And when I first met Robert, I was in town playing with this big band. There was this guy in Boston, Kendrick Oliver. He had a big band, and he's from Houston. So I remember they rented the bus, and we went down, and Robert got on the bus, and I had heard about Robert. Like when we were in college, I was at Berkeley, he was at New School. I was hearing about this guy from Houston. I heard about this guy from Houston. I knew about Casey from high school because, the alto players, you kind of, know even more about. I knew about Casey, and I knew about this guy. There was this guy from Miami who at the time was playing a white tenor saxophone. It was Marcus Strickland. But Robert got on the bus, and probably 2 minutes into him being on the bus, hanging out with Kendrick Oliver, who's from Houston, he mentions Dilla. And I had never heard another, musician, even though, at that age, all my friends were listening to Dilla too. A lot, well, maybe not that many. I feel like Dilla was still kind of underground at that time. But when he mentioned Dilla, my ears perked up.
Coming from a jazz musician.
Yeah. I was like, what? So I'm like, yo, who are you? So as soon as I moved down to New York, I started playing with, in fact, my first gig was with Keon. I'll never forget. It was with Keon Harold. And Keon called me. I was still living in Boston. The gig may have paid $50. I may have paid $70 to get there. But I think Rob was on keys. And just for me, when I heard what they were doing, it was like, wow, like this is what I've been hearing. This is what I've wanted to do. you know. Now, I can say that when I was coming up in Philly, the roots were here,
Right.
you know. So when I was 12, well, not maybe 13, 14 years old, I used to they used to have these jam sessions, and I would go to the jam session. And at the time, like, you know, when I was 13, when I first started getting into the music, the albums I had was Wayne Shorter's Speak No Evil, Tribe Called Quest, People's Instinctive Travels. Those albums were on rotation, you know. So by the time I got to, you know, Berkeley and then moved to New York, I was deep into like, it was like hip hop and jazz, you know. And I feel like this is kind of what I wanted to do, but I didn't see too many people doing it. Once Rob got in there, you know, and the one thing that I noticed immediately was like, Rob started doing hip hop shows. No, quietly, like he didn't talk about it too much, but you know, every once in a while he'd be like, "Yeah, you know, I did." And Bilal, who's also from Philly, was kind of going in that direction too. Because when Bilal was here, he was basically just singing jazz. Like he wasn't. I didn't hear him doing. I know he was doing some gospel stuff, but I didn't hear him doing what he's doing now. Then, but they slowly start doing that, and as I saw it, I mean, I feel like things happen so fast. It's crazy to think it was over 20 years ago. But I saw how much of an influence Rob was on the younger musicians, because I feel as though, you know, the music is always going to evolve. Music is always going to change. And it goes back to me what I was saying about being honest and being sincere, is like, Rob, this is what he wanted to do. This is what he was hearing. And I feel sometimes in music, we can feel restricted to playing, you know, and I think that was kind of happening with, you know, many styles of music. There are those of us that grew up listening to, you know, when I did my first record, I was like, man, like, I love A Tribe Called Quest. I got to do something in that vein on my first record. So I have this song called Lage Lude, and I kind of had Lage just do some things with effects and kind of like a loop, you know. And then we did another song with Mark called Leo Lude, where I basically, I think I just took some changes from another song and just had Robert vamp them, you know. But I think what Robert has done, sorry for the long answer, but I just think what Robert has done is amazing. You know, it's beautiful. And I think it's inspired the music to grow and inspired musicians to grow and be honest.
Well, earlier you talked about the people who need to hear this from the invisible, as it were, the most, often don't, you know. And I think to myself, in a lot of ways, black music is one of the most subversive ways to sort of impart a certain amount of humanity to people that they might not even know they're getting. I think the history of our music has presented that for sure. And so I think Robert taps into that as well.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think you in your own way tap into that.
Thank you.
You know, I really enjoy this record.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
You're incredibly thoughtful and, you know, and very deliberative in a beautiful way.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank you. This is a wonderful record, Painter of the Invisible, out July 11th.
Yes.
Jaleel Shaw, thank you for joining us on The Late Set.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.